everyone! So today I'm finally going to be doing a tutorial on these full image resin pieces. This is probably the most requested tutorial I get, but it's also super simple, so we're just going to go ahead and get started. So of course, to start off, you're going to need your images, and I'm just putting my images into a Word document and adjusting the sizes based on the size of the mold I want to use. I also recommend printing off a couple different sizes of your image, just in case you make one too large or too small, you don't have to print it again, and then I'm just printing these on regular printer paper. Once it's printed, you're just going to have to fit the image into the mold you want to use. For this, you're going to need a resin piece the size you want to make your piece to trace, maybe some toothpicks and scissors. I also use an X-Acto knife to cut mine out. So here I'm just laying the mold over the image just to make sure it'll fit. Another way to ensure that your image will fit in the mold is to take your resin piece and to place it over the image. And then I'm just taking a toothpick and I'm gently running it around the resin piece. This will leave a slight indent around your piece, and you'll be able to see where the image would fit in the resin piece without marking it up with a pencil and potentially ruining your printout. Once I decide where the piece should fit, I just trace it with a pencil and then I just cut it out with a pair of scissors. For the larger resin piece, I actually just took an X-Acto blade and cut directly around the resin piece I was using for reference. And then when I was done, I was just left with these two heart-shaped pieces of paper. So once these are cut out, you're going to notice that they don't perfectly fit into your mold, so you're just going to place them in and see where they need adjustments, and then just bit by bit cut out the pieces that don't perfectly fit. And you're going to want to do this very slowly and only in very small increments to make sure that you don't cut away too much. And if you're working with a mold that is completely flat on the front like this one, then it should fit completely flat to the front of the mold. If you're using a mold that is puffy and not flat, then you're going to want to keep the piece of paper as large as possible. So you're not going to make it so it pushes all the way to the front of the mold, but only just so that it'll fit in the mold but still cover as much of the background as possible. So for puffy resin pieces, it should look something like this, and then you're left with your two final pieces of paper and you can start pouring your resin. So for my project, I am just using regular 2-part clear epoxy resin, and I'm also going to use a plastic mold as well as a silicone mold. So for the flat mold, I am just using a very, very thin layer of resin. You can use more resin, but I prefer to only just use enough resin so that it'll cover the piece of paper once I add it to the mold. And for the puffy resin piece, I am going to add a much thicker layer of resin. And this is so I won't have to push the piece of paper to the front of the mold, so we'll still get as much of the image as possible without distorting it, and it'll still be covered with resin completely. So once your molds are filled with resin, you're just going to want to remove the air bubbles with a heat gun or with a lighter. So once you've removed all the air bubbles, you can go ahead and add your image, and for a flat resin piece, literally all you do is take your piece of paper and push it all the way to the front of the mold and make sure it's completely covered in resin. I know this is pretty counterintuitive if you're used to resin crafting, because normally if you have a piece of paper you should seal it with tape or some other kind of sealant, but trust me when I say that this is the best method to do this, and I'll show you how to fix the stained appearance later. And for the puffy resin piece, you are going to take your piece of paper and basically do the opposite of a flat resin piece and gently place it on top of the resin and only tap it with a toothpick just to release any air bubbles caught underneath. And you're probably not going to get the resin to completely cover the piece because you really want to avoid pressing it down, so you might have to go back with your resin and cover the back just to make sure that the paper is completely covered. And then once you're done adding your resin to your pieces, you're just going to go back again and remove any air bubbles, and then you're going to leave this to cure completely. And once it's completely cured, you're going to notice that the paper has become quite transparent. So in order to fix this and to make the piece look better, I'm just going to add a thin layer of white resin to the back, and this is going to bring back a lot of the color that was in the piece. And for these pieces, I am going to be using amazing casting resin because it cures in 10 minutes and it cures completely opaque white. So once the background layer of your resin piece is completely cured, you can go ahead and pop out your pieces, and then you're left with a perfect full image resin piece. And of course, once you have your finished piece, you would finish the back just like you would any other resin piece by sanding and doming it. And that is it for the tutorial. I really hope that it was helpful, and I have a feeling it was much easier than people expected it to be. So if you like this video or you found it helpful, please let me know, and as always, thank you for watching. Bye!